Good morning, good afternoon, depends on where you're logged in from. My name is Patrick Conte. I'm the CEO of the African Fintech Network. Welcome to this part 2 of our webinar on fintech sustainability. For our opening remarks and welcome remarks, I will now invite Hugh of Making Finance Work for Africa.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Yes. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone, depending on your workstations. My name is Ukame Tafak. I'm a financial sector advisor within the Secretariat of Making Finance Work for Africa, which is housed at the African Development Bank in Ivory Coast. It's our distinct pleasure with the co-host organization of this webinar, Making Finance Work for Africa, Africa NENDA, Africa Fintech Network, and the Africa Fintech Forum, to welcome you to this second webinar on fintech sustainability, and the impact of governance and regulations. This webinar is part of a series on the fintech industry in Africa that we are willing to organize with our partner organizations, really to unpack the knowledge and also share more light on the fintech industry in Africa. The second webinar, the one of today, is the second webinar on the impact of governance and regulation on the fintech industry. The first webinar really tried to identify some of the main challenges that the fintech and fintech industry face in Africa, from the seed stage up to the level of maturity. But we found that it was not enough. We didn't have enough time really to go deep in the subject, and that's why we thought that we should really come up with another webinar really to explore and go to much detail on some aspect of this topical subject. I will not go very in depth on the topic today. I think I've just said the same. My colleague Janaiba will then come afterwards, and in her introductory remark will try to give more context to the subject before we have the moderator, Mr. Conte, really going on with the panel conversations. So on that, I will just share with you some of the housekeeping rules that help us to have a smooth delivery of these webinars. As you will see on the screen, the duration of this webinar is 19 minutes or 1 hour and 15 minutes. For a good comfort of the sessions, we actually put all the participants on mute to avoid some background noise on some interference that could really affect the quality of these webinars. However, you will have the opportunity to submit your questions through the Q&A panel. There is also the possibility of normally you can raise your hand, and we can see if we can really unmute you and get your questions to the audience. For really to address the expectation of our audience, we have provided simultaneous translations. So you have the English and the French channels that are available, and you can just look at the bottom and see how to really use the to connect one of the channels the most appropriate for you. Also, really to serve our audience, we will make available the recording of these sessions 72 hours after the webinar, which means 3 days maximum that will be available. And we will also post the recording on the website of Making Finance Work for Africa. You also have the opportunity to share some, if you encounter any technical problem, really to submit your questions by sending just a message to to the platform, and we will see how to assist you. Finally, and that's very important. We have a questionnaire that will pop up automatically at the end of the sessions. We really value your feedback. We really appreciate to hear what are your views and what are most hot topic that you would like us to address in our webinar series in the future. So please do not hesitate at the end of the webinar to really fill that form and submit your comments on the sessions and our webinar series. On that, I will hand over the floor to my colleague, Mrs. Geneva Khan from the African Nenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hugh, and thank you for setting up the stage with the house rules for the webinar. As mentioned, this is a 90-minute session looking to continue the discussions that we started last week in part 1 of our webinars series on fintech sustainability and the impact of governance and regulatory frameworks in Africa. I believe that this subject matter is a timely one for Africa, where we've been seeing an emergence of digital technologies, including fintech. And so there's a lot of interest on this subject matter. And with our partners from Africa Fintech Network, Making Finance Work for Africa, and African Fintech Forum, we have set up this deep dive session today to go further into what was already discussed last month. Just to go over some of the calls to action that came out from last webinar. As Hugh mentioned, we spoke about governance and regulatory framework from different countries. We got the experience from Mauritania, we got experience from Ghana, we got experience from fintech providers directly, and a lot of them align on the fact that there's a need for adopted regulatory frameworks depending on the ecosystem of the country. Another call to action that was highlighted during that session was that fintech organizations should try to incorporate fintech associations so that they follow through on best practices, good governance as per the market in Africa. Different fintechs have different structures, have different platforms, depending on their offering. One thing that also came out a lot was data protection, consumer protection, fraud, risk. So how do we enable innovation while still staying in line with governance and regulatory requirements? So today we're going to deep dive into further this thematic, and we're going to look into proportionality. As I said earlier, fintechs, there are different sizes of fintechs. There's smaller fintechs, larger fintechs, but all of them deserve a seat and contribution when we talk about governance structures. As well, we're going to look at consumer protection, fraud risks, different risks that are put in place that we would like to allow more innovation, but at the same time, keep with best practices in Africa to protect consumers and what's so. So I'm very happy that we put together a panel today that will deep dive further into this topic. And as an outcome of this conversation, a communique will be shared, with recommendations, calls to action, and things that need to be done to improve the governance and regulatory frameworks of fintechs in Africa. So having said that, I want to send over the mic to Patrick Conte, who will be moderating this session. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send them through the chat box, and we will address them during Q&A. The panelists will address it during Q&A. Thank you, Patrick. On to you.
Thank you, Geneva. Thank you. I think you both have laid the foundation for our call season 2 of our webinar on fintech sustainability in Africa. And for those who just joined, my name is Patrick Conte. I'm the CEO of the African Fintech Network. What do we do at the African Fintech Network? We represent the voice of advocacy when it comes to the fintech ecosystem in the continent. We champion advocacy in terms of encouraging collaboration at country level. We encourage fintechs to come together to get to know each other, share best practices, and most importantly, at country level, we encourage fintech to have wider engagement with policymakers and regulators. And then thirdly, in terms of our collaboration that we promote, we encourage across-country collaboration. So therefore, under our membership, as I speak now, we collaborate or we lead 40 fintech associations or groups across Africa. So we represent that umbrella voice, championing the advocacy for the development of fintech and the wider digital finance ecosystem of Africa. So it's a pleasure to moderate this second season or this second session of the webinar on fintech sustainability. On our panel, which is well balanced. Now I realize it's really well balanced. In terms of gender parity. So I would like each panelist to then introduce themselves, starting with Ingrid, ladies first.
Thank you, Patrick. Please let me know if I'm audible.
You are.
Great. My name is Ingrid Chuzuzo. I am from Rwanda, and I work for the National Bank of Rwanda. I'm in charge of financial sector development and innovation.
Thank you, Ingrid. Eva?
Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're listening us from. My name is Evelyn Gashoki from Kenya. I am an attorney in law and compliance professional. I work with fintech companies and digital finance companies to ensure and aid them in compliance where legal, regulatory, and governance is concerned.
Thank you, Eva. Ibrahima? Ibrahima, are you there, please?
Vous m'entendez? Vous m'entendez? Oui. Donc, bonjour à tous. Je suis Ibrahima Kanda Diallo. Je suis de nationalité guinéenne et je suis le directeur de la supervision des institutions financières inclusives. Entendez par là les institutions de microfinance, les établissements de monnaie électronique et les établissements de transfert d'argent. Donc, je suis en charge des questions de régulation. Et mon département assure également la coordination de la politique d'inclusion financière au niveau de la Banque centrale. Alors, je suis particulièrement heureux de participer à ce panel pour discuter d'un sujet tant passionnant qu'est la régulation des fintech dans un contexte de gouvernance pas souvent uniforme. Merci.
Thank you, Ibrahima. Lastly, but by no means the least, our CEO from Touch and Pay, Olamide.
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Olamide Afolabi. I'm the CEO of Touch and Pay. We are focused on providing infrastructure to digitize microtransactions in Africa, meaning small value transactions. And one of the biggest use cases that we're played in is in public transport, where we help over 4 million pay for bus rides in Lagos and other parts of Nigeria. I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I mean, the audience, our participants will have realized we have a well-balanced panel, not only in terms of gender parity. Importantly, we have regulators and we have a fintech who comes with hands-on experience, and then we have a legal expert. And most importantly for us as partners is the fact that we have a French-speaking regulator. Because one of the things we champion at the African Fintech Network, technology doesn't know boundaries. Whether you are French, you are English, you are Portuguese, you are Indian, technology is technology. So for Africa, we champion a singular platform for engagement. Francophone, Anglophone, Portuguese, you name it. We must come together to promote the development of the digital finance ecosystem. So that is why this panel is so unique. So to get us going, last week I was a panel member at the Nigerian Fintech Week, and as part of the session, we had two representatives from Rwanda Finance Limited. You know, they made a presentation positioning Rwanda as a hub for tech, as a hub for innovation. So to get us started, I would like to call on Ingrid as a regulator in Rwanda to sort of speak to the positive regulatory development in Rwanda and what are some of the challenges when it comes to regulations of fintech. Over to you, Ingrid.
Thank you. First of all, maybe before I enter on the regulatory side, One quick comment is that by Rwanda declaring its ambition to position itself as a fintech hub, there has been a change of perspective whereby now the approach is more of an ecosystem support to the fintech industry. So there's work being done by the policymakers, there's work being done by Rwanda Finance for investment attraction, there's work being done by different private players for incubation and accelerators. So this brings me to the point that it's an entire ecosystem support. But specifically on the regulatory point, there has been a lot of developments. The main one I could mention is the fact that both financial sector regulators, the National Bank of Rwanda and the Capital Market Authority have their own regulatory sandbox regimes that enables fintechs to be able to test their solutions in a regulated environment with real clients, which is a real challenge for fintechs, and enable them to learn the regulatory environment, to learn the real problem statements in the markets, and to be able to provide solutions in that. But apart from the regulatory sandboxes, the National Bank of Rwanda is also really studying the different emerging technologies and how those could help deliver financial services better. So here, the National Bank of Rwanda is studying the possibility, the feasibility of open finance in Rwanda, what that would mean to fintechs, the ability to share data for new products developments, and then also the applicability of a central bank digital currency. So on the regulatory front, I would really say that that's the different advances that we've made, but also overall, there is a zeal and a need to understand in our current regulatory framework, do we have any clauses, any provisions that could hinder fintechs or digital financial services to strive at the end of the day? In terms of the gaps, I think as a continent, not even just as Rwanda, we have a challenge around regulation harmonization. I think it would be much better if fintechs were able to navigate our different jurisdictions very smoothly. I know countries are putting in different efforts to try to bridge this gap, but I think it's going to be a game changer if fintechs are able to navigate the different regulatory ecosystems very easily. Another challenge, but though I know it's different from many countries, is again the ecosystem approach. I think we'll get a chance to discuss about it, but what is enough? If you put in regulatory provisions alone, is it enough? Or do you need to do more around investment, around the pre-regulate? So many fintechs exist even before they interact with the regulatory body. So what kind of support is there? So I think those two are the challenges that are still remaining.
Well, thank you, Ingrid, for setting that stage. I would like to based on the stage you have set, no doubt Rwanda is doing a great job in the space. We would like to hear a perspective from Guinea, from Ibrahima. Ibrahima, to get us started with Guinea, one, Guinea is French speaking, and number two, we don't know the extent to which the ecosystem when it comes to fintech, is developing. Can you provide that high level description of the Guinea fintech ecosystem? What is happening in the space? What do you see happening?
Ok, merci Patrick. Au niveau de la Guinée, c'est vrai que l'écosystème, il est en développement, embryonnaire, mais en développement. Donc, à ce jour, nous avons 4 sociétés qui proposent des services financiers numériques qui disposent d'un agrément de la Banque centrale. Aussi, dans le secteur du transfert d'argent, on observe un mouvement de transformation digitale avec le recours de technologies financières globalement par une dizaine. Pour le reste, elles sont encore positionnées sur du transfert d'argent basé sur des mécanismes traditionnels. Alors, les fintechs de la place ou autres entreprises assimilées proposent des services d'agrégation de paiement ou de porte-monnaie électronique. Nous avons aussi des fintechs qui collaborent avec des établissements bancaires déjà établis sur des segments d'analyse de risque de crédit. Alors, les autorisations de partenariat sont délivrées aux établissements agréés, donc déjà établis, puisque du point de vue du régulateur, pour l'instant, le risque est porté par l'établissement. Donc, en gros, nous avons des établissements de monnaie électronique et des entreprises de transfert d'argent qui sont, enfin, qu'on qualifie plutôt sur le segment fintech. Cependant, lors de la dernière semaine des fintech organisées en République de Guinée, d'ailleurs à l'initiative du secteur privé, nous avons rencontré, enfin, de manière isolée, un grand nombre d'acteurs qui sont sur ce segment-là, mais généralement au stade d'idée. Donc, globalement, ces acteurs ne sont pas inscrits dans les registres de création d'entreprises, et donc, ce qui peut poser un problème du point de vue du régulateur. Et aussi, on note l'absence de cadre formel de dialogue entre ces fintechs et la Banque centrale, qui est à la fois l'organe de réglementation et de contrôle. Donc voilà, grosso modo, comment se caractérise l'écosystème des fintech en Guinée.
Thank you. It's really good to note the early stages of what is happening in the ecosystem. Yeah, and the fact that there is no formalized body that should bring, sort of gravitate regulators and the ecosystem, which is really very important. We encourage the ecosystem players, the regulators, the fintechs, development finance institutions, policymakers like government to really sit around the table and discuss issues about digital finance. There is no choice about digitization innovation. That's where the world is heading. So the earlier we collaborate and form partnerships, form formalized bodies, the better will it be for the ecosystem in Guinea. Now we have looked at, well, for starters, issues about regulation. We want to take the second dimension to this webinar, which is about governance, ensuring that fintechs, they operate properly. Olamide, you come with an experience as the CEO of a renowned fintech. I don't want to blow your horn because Touch and Pay were the winners of EcoBank Fintech Challenge last year, 2022. They took home $50,000 as prize money in 2022. Could you share your experiences when it comes to governance? Fintech governance.
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, I think we are in a space where even most investors will tell you that you need to hire a chief compliance officer so that you can be well abreast with all the regulatory and governance that is necessary for you to operate in a country. The reason why that is because we've now started realizing that regulation is not meant to, choke us or kill us. It's actually meant to protect us. And I think that the issue before was because a lot of regulators have not done a great job in letting people understand the importance of regulation. But right now, I think we are getting there where regulators have started stepping out of their comfort zone, going to meet fintechs to let them understand the processes and all that. So for us, it's extremely important. It's a requirement from investors right now. It's a requirement for even our own business to ensure that we follow every regulatory requirement of any country we decide to expand into or where we are operating from. And the reason is not just to protect the customers based on the framework that the regulators have also done, but also to make sure that we have a base that is scalable and that can work without having to disrupt anything. So for every single thing we do, we have someone that is reading the policies to say, oh, you can do this, you can't do this, and to follow the entire framework that the regulators in those countries have laid down so that we are not breaking the ground. And I want to encourage every fintech as well to also follow this line to make sure that once they launch and they have customers, they should get in. It's very important. It's as important as having a chief growth officer or a business development person. So have a chief compliance officer that is high up there, that is helping them look at the regulations, because regulation can actually actually mar your business. You can be $100 billion business and you get shut down, or a regulation will come that destroys you, and there's nothing you can do about it. We've seen that happen in Nigeria when overnight, Lagos State government banned Okada, and most companies that have raised $7 million just had to find somewhere to go because their business was gone. And I think that that's the way fintech should also consider this. They need to be abreast with regulations always.
Thank you so much, Olamide. I'm still with you. Can you just provide high-level overview of the way Touch and Pay is structured in terms of governance? Do you have a board? Do you have a management team? Just, how is Touch and Pay structured in terms of governance internally?
Yeah. So one thing that I would like to mention, use this opportunity to mention, is that before any startup decides to scale, they need to ensure that their governance structure is intact. And I'm saying this because it's one of the reasons why a lot of startups that we might be hearing on the news are missing it, are having serious issues, even after raising a lot of capital. So what we have done is that we have a board of directors, we have a chairman, we do our board meeting every quarter. Then we have the CEO that reports to the board of directors. Then we have the CTO, the CGO, and the COO that manages. The COO is the Chief Operating Officer. CGO growth manages the business. The CTO manages the tech, and everybody reports through the CEO to the board. And then most departments are now put under this. Then, of course, we also have a Chief Compliance Officer that is currently under the Chief Operating Officer. And the whole idea is that legal compliance and everything is an oversight of the Chief Operating Officer. Because if we are operating and then we are not compliant, then we probably run into trouble, and all our deployed funds will probably go into waste. So, and that's one of the reasons why for now we put it under the Chief Operating Officer, the compliance structure. So, and every other department is based on that. Tech is under the technology, technical support and customer service is under operations, legal is under operations, and that's how we are currently structured. And business is under growth, basically.
Thank you so much, Olamide. I want to come to our legal experts here. Eva, she specializes in the legal ramifications when it comes to compliance and law. Eva, you've just heard Olamide sharing experiences, the sort of way Touch and Pay is structured. There is a board, there is a management, there are directors that lead the operations. Do you think there is a defined corporate governance model for fintechs? And further, can fintechs in Africa generally afford the sort of model that's Touch and Pay, which resembles international standard? Do you think this fits or should fit all fintechs in Africa in terms of governance?
Oh, okay. Picking up from the conversation by Mr. Olamide, where corporate governance is concerned and the team that plays, I would believe that what is supposed to be ensured by most fintechs is proper communication channels are ensured, proper segregation of the offices, and there's independence of the parties that are in charge of the key departments of the organization. Like Olamide has mentioned, it's important to have the board. Certainly, all members, the CEO and the rest of the team is supposed to report to the board. Then we have the CTO, the CGO, depending on what your fintech does. There are those roles that must be there. CTO for fintech, certainly, that's supposed to be there. There's a CEO for purposes of operations, there's a CEO who all should report to the board. What I have been seeing recently with some of the fintechs I work with, I've been seeing some break of communication and execution of work when the compliance role is put under, so many other roles. And I have been encouraging and recommending that the compliance role be independent. There are so many things that fall into the compliance. We have, risk. There's the operational risk. There's the market risk. There's the technology risk, regulatory risk. All these are usually handled by the same compliance person. So it makes more business viable to separate that role as its own. So then there is proper independence. Of course, just like we have the CTO and the CEO reporting to the CEO, if their compliance person could report directly to the CEO, then there's a segregation and that independence from these other heads of departments. But other than the CEO, the COO, the CTO, and compliance, then the rest of them, there's no one fit all. It's depending on what space and what phase a fintech is at and what kind of business you actually do. You'll find that there are fintechs that are global. When you go global, of course, the corporate governance is going to vary. If you're only local, it varies if you're going to be global. So it's not one fit all. There are roles that are mandatory and key to have, but it's not a one fit all process. So each fintech is distinct.
Thank you. So basically, there is no one size fits all when it comes to corporate governance. It's a matter of the organization itself.
Yes, there are key roles that should be met. The board, of course. Above the board, you can also have the advisors as well. They come with with immense experience and networking and all that. Then we have now these other heads of departments. But any other thing after that, it's on a fintech to fintech case, depending on where you are, your phase, and jurisdictions you're in. Yeah.
So your jurisdiction, what you do, where you are, the products, the market you are in, sort of determines the sort of governance structure that you need to operate as a fintech. Exactly. I want to take us back to the issue of regulations. Ingrid, I noted in my diary here that in Rwanda there are 2 sandboxes by 2 institutions, and from my experience, often there is need for one sandbox in small jurisdictions. So I want you to speak to the advantages or otherwise of having multiple sandboxes. One, what are sandboxes, at least for our audience who are here listening, our participants? Some may not be privy as to what are regulatory sandboxes. What are regulatory sandboxes? And is it advantageous for a country that is small to have 2 regulatory sandboxes? What has been the benefit of regulatory sandboxes when it comes to regulation of fintech in Rwanda?
Thank you. I'll first provide a quick definition of a regulatory sandbox. I believe that many people in the tech world are used to the word sandbox, but for different purposes. There's a technical sandbox, there's a data sandbox, there's different types of sandboxes. But when we talk about regulatory sandbox, this is then a framework that enables a player in the financial sector or any regulated sector, in fact, to get flexibilities, waivers, or any facilitation in navigating the regulations of a certain regulator. So put simply, this is a regulated environment where in case a fintech cannot comply with the full regulatory requirements, can get different waivers to be able to operate as if licensed in a market. Usually the sandbox period is temporary. No one can be in the sandbox for the entire business lifetime. But during that time, 12, 6 months, whatever you've agreed with your regulator about, it enables you to test this product in a live environment with real clients, mitigating real risks, which moves you to the learning curve much faster and moves the regulator to the learning curve much faster. Let's also admit that through regulatory sandboxes, both fintechs and regulators are learning about new businesses and new approaches of providing financial services. I hope that works as a definition. In any case, I'd be free to clarify at any point in time. You asked about 2 regulators. I would say that this is not 2 sandboxes in a market. I would say that it's not really a choice of having 2 sandboxes. It depends on the regulatory structure in a given country. So in Rwanda, we have the National Bank of Rwanda that regulates banking services, insurance and pension, payment service providers, microfinance institutions, lending financial institutions that do not take deposits. So we have this particular docket of the financial sector that we are mandated to regulate as the National Bank of Rwanda. And then we have the Capital Market Authority that has the mandate to regulate all capital market activities, that also regulates the Rwanda Stock Exchange within its mandate. So we have 2 different regulators that operate two separate regulatory mandates. Hence, the reason why if you are a fintech acting within the National Bank of Rwanda space, you have the opportunity to have a sandbox. And if you're a fintech operating within the capital market space, you have the opportunity to have a sandbox. One thing I would mention though is, even in your introductory remarks, you mentioned that technology has no limits. You would have a product that is hybrid, that has capital market features, that has lending features, that has saving features. So what we do in that case as regulators is we collaborate on particular products, and then we agree on one streamlined methodology for that particular fintech, so that they don't have to go through different sandboxes. So it all depends on the regulatory structure of a given country. Lastly, on the experiences we've had, as I'll speak for the National Bank of Rwanda now, is, and I like many of the points that Olamide brought up when you asked him about the relationship between fintechs and regulators, because many of the things he mentioned are things that we've experienced as we were implementing a regulatory sandbox and making it operational here in Rwanda. So one, the regulatory sandbox has opened the doors to many fintechs to interact with the regulator, something that was not the case many years ago or a few years ago, depending on your country. It has opened that door for conversation, for learning, and has enabled both fintechs and regulators to gain some level of maturity on how they see regulations and fintechs interacting. But in Rwanda particularly, we have seen an issue of lack of understanding of regulations and the regulatory landscape overall, that we've had to really emphasize through different webinars, market engagement, trainings to the fintech communities, collaborating with the different incubators to be able to communicate what is the regulatory landscape in Rwanda, what are the different regulations that concern fintechs that operate in this country. Secondly, the other issue we've noticed was the issue of concentration. It's interesting that we call this innovation, but at the end of the day, innovation will go where there are incumbents. So we noticed this in Rwanda for the first two cohorts of our sandbox. Most solutions were in the payment space, where we have very strong incumbents. And as a regulator and as a market development catalyst, we're like, what happens to areas like insurance that have the lowest penetration, not just in Rwanda, but also in Africa? So we decided to now collaborate with the fintech ecosystem to show real problem statements in the market, not to leave it just to fintechs to figure out what to develop. So we adopted a thematic sandbox cohort approach. We started with an insurance cohort, which surprisingly was very successful. We had 6 fintechs applicants that had very interesting market solutions. So overall, we have about eight fintechs that are currently testing from the past 4 cohorts. And we were really able to learn together the process and understand what are the real market problems in the financial sector that fintechs should be resolving.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. There's so much you have said. Let me just recap for our audience and for those who are coming in. I think what we see from Rwanda, one, is a situation where the regulator here, the regulators, including the central bank, they are really very proactive. They are being responsive. They preempt the environment. So that is why you see 2 sandboxes in operations, ensuring that fintechs in different verticals are covered, almost covered. So if you have a product, a service that is new, that's regulatory sandbox provides the platform for you to test, for you to learn, so you learn alongside the regulators watching you. So that's really a very good, important development to know. Then number 2, she also mentioned the fact that the regulators collaborate, which is absent in some jurisdictions. You have countries where the central bank doesn't speak to the stock exchange doesn't speak to the insurance commission doesn't speak to the transport commission, nor the telecoms commission. So what she's saying, which we are encouraging countries, are in what we do, let there be collaboration, engagement of regulators. Come together, they speak to each other, they don't know if there are potential overlaps of their functions, whether there are gray areas where regulations are not covering. So that way, they can collectively respond to the ecosystem. And thirdly, she also mentioned where the regulators in Rwanda, they are proactive in identifying segments that needs to come up. So they've seen that payment is getting, overcrowded. So they encourage fintech to enter into the insurtech space. So this is how regulators can actually support the ecosystem, collaborate, identify the trends in the market, provide the pointers, provide the enabling environment for new products to be tested. Now, we want to keep this as engaging as possible. We've sort of have first round of questions, and responses from the panel. We want to start taking questions that are coming from participants. And there is a question here specifically for you, Ingrid. It says, what levers or actions have been identified to improve the performance and development of the fintech ecosystem in Rwanda and Nigeria? So you would take Rwanda and Olamide would take Nigeria. What has been done to improve the performance of fintechs in Nigeria, in Rwanda? So you go ahead with Rwanda. What has been done? I know you've already spoken to it, but just a recap of the main things that is happening to support the ecosystem in Rwanda. And then Olamide can come in to speak on the Nigeria experience.
There's so many, but I'll try to group them in their key dockets. So first of all, to have the fintech space develop, you need to have a financial infrastructure they can start with, they can play with. So to have a working payment system, for example, internet connectivity, telephone or internet penetration are things that are very key in any country for the good performance of fintechs. So an enabling infrastructure is very key. And in Rwanda, we have worked on developing an infrastructure from a payment system to availing internet penetration across the country, but also to make our payment system interoperable for all players in the market through a central switch. Secondly, there's the regulatory front that I think we've been talking about all this time that I will not go into again. On the regulatory front, I think there are three main things. One is to evaluate regulations and understand, do I have any things that are not supportive of the digital financial services or fintech ecosystem? And then once you've identified them, you can tackle them as a regulator and add new things. But also regulation, same as technology, keep evolving. As a regulator, you need to stay ahead and be able to take care of the different issues, like the issue I mentioned earlier of digital currencies, the issue I mentioned around open finance, that are all enablers for the market. And then the last two dockets are demand, on the demand side, and on the supply side. So on the demand side here, we are talking about consumers of digital financial services. What are you doing to, for example, enhance digital literacy among the people so that they can be able to adopt and absorb these new fintech products that are coming? And on the supply side, obviously, there is how much capital is coming through the country, how much support do the fintech community get in terms of incubation, acceleration, and eventually attracting more capital to the ecosystem. So four main dockets: infrastructure, regulations, demand generation to absorb the fintech products, and then obviously continuing to push more supply of fintech products in the market.
Thank you, Ingrid. Over to you, Olamide. What's happening? What do you see as being the positive developments in the fintech ecosystem?
Oh, yes. I think that fintechs in Africa generally have contributed immensely to the development of the financial infrastructure. A case in point, Nigeria. Agency banking that have now become something really huge today have been championed by fintech. And I think this has also worked because of the collaboration between the regulator and the Fintech Association of Nigeria. And of course, every player, because I remember then when Paga started distributed financing through agency banking, they had collaboration with NIBS and CBN to come up with a framework as a guideline for this. And if you see where that has led us, it has led to something we now call MoneyPoint, PalmPay, OPay today, that almost every corner in Nigeria, you can see an agent to do, to perform your financial activities. And I think that it doesn't get better than that. With this collaboration, with this immense work by people that have gotten funding from foreign countries to see that the advancement of technology is fostering financial activities in the country, and then also collaboration through ecosystem play with players in the industry, banks, regulators, startups working together for the first time. I think it has also championed a very huge advancement in the financial space in Nigeria.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. There are a lot of, I will just take one more question from the audience, then I come back to the panel themselves. It says, is there a best practice governance checklist we should check to see if we are in compliance or not? This is a fintech asking a question. Eva, can you respond to this? It says, is there a best practice governance checklist we should check to see if we are in compliance? Is there a checklist that fintech can draw upon to say, okay, this is a guide, help us to ensure our governance, is on the right footing?
What I can maybe offer is to prepare maybe what is standard across corporates, not specifically fintechs, but across corporates. And then I can share it, with the organizer, and then in the list of, because I think they will be, my apologies, I just realized that my video is off.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that, yes. I can prepare a standard for corporates, just even beyond fintechs. And then what is also regarded as key for fintech companies, borrowing from various regulators. Once I share it with the organizer of the webinar, then they can share it with the rest of the information within the 72 hours period that has been given. That I can do.
Since the order, this is already live. Can you just speak to one or two things you made, will be on that checklist? What will be topmost 2 or 3 items?
Ensuring transparency. That is one, ensure that there is proper transparency, ensure there is accountability. The team and the people that you work with, this is the board, the kind of people that you choose in the board are important. What are the people you work with inside inside your department? Who are your compliance people? What is their kind of qualifications? Who is dealing with your people inside, your employees? What kind of communication channels have you set up? What systems and processes do you have inside your organization that ensure corporate governance is maintained?
Thank you so much. I would just want to add, especially for startups, you might be starting up, so you might say, oh, well, this is too much for me. I don't have money to, bring all of these resources. But for startups, what we normally advise from the African Fintech Network, minimum, try to avoid one-man businesses. One-man businesses don't survive long. They die no sooner the one person died. Key man risk. So if you're a startup, it's your idea, you have the initiative, incorporate somebody else. You may have the knowledge. Somebody else may have the money. Somebody else may have the marketing skills. So this is how you make a business. So don't think that because you are the tech guy, you can do it all alone. You are a tech guy, needs money, needs marketing, needs information on governance. So try to get a team. If you are a startup, don't operate on a one-man show. It doesn't keep you for long. Try to bring a team on board to share the knowledge, the idea, because the ideas, when they come together, you pull resources, they complement each other, you can deliver. So I will add that as part of the governance corporate governance minimum checklist. We want to progress to the discussion.
Before you proceed, if you add something else in line to what you've said, also for the founders and the people who have created fintechs to ensure they stay away from what their expertise is not. So if you are a technology person, if you are good with building businesses, stay away from finance, stay away from operations, keep it away from what you do. Then you're able to focus on what it is that you can do and let the rest of the team lead on these other aspects.
Thank you so much. We want to go back to Guinea. Ibrahima, you described in your intro that the Guinea fintech ecosystem is relatively nascent, it's new, it's developing, there are few fintechs, you've described it. Could you just take us a step further, describing the regulatory environment? Of the Central Bank of Guinea, have you guys introduced new laws, new regulations, to govern what is happening in the fintech ecosystem? What is happening regulation-wise?
OK. Merci, Patrick. D'abord, peut-être qu'il faut replanter un peu le décor. C'est qu'il faut bien le reconnaître qu'au départ, la Banque centrale était calée sur la réglementation et même méfiante vis-à-vis de l'activité de ces nouveaux acteurs au regard des impératifs de stabilité financière et de protection des consommateurs. Donc, le principe était que chaque candidat devait s'efforcer d'être en conformité avec les dispositions réglementaires. Mais la doctrine a changé, elle a commencé à bouger. Donc, au fil des échanges et au vu de l'évolution des fintech dans de nombreux pays, notamment des pays en voie de développement, et tenant compte des impacts positifs sur l'inclusion financière, la Banque centrale a été à l'écoute du marché. Donc, nous avons, dans un premier temps, autorisé des partenariats entre telco et établissements bancaires, mais cette expérimentation n'a pas permis d'atteindre les objectifs espérés. Donc, c'est toujours dans la dynamique de soutien à l'innovation et à l'adoption de technologies dans le domaine financier qu'on a élaboré un premier cadre qui a permis l'émergence d'un statut particulier pour les établissements de monnaie électronique qui dérive globalement de la loi bancaire. C'est un statut particulier qui a été déconsolidé de la loi bancaire. Donc, cette réglementation était globalement proportionnée puisqu'il y avait moins d'exigences, par exemple, en matière de capital, moins d'exigences en termes de reporting. C'est un reporting simplifié. Et pour les entreprises naissantes, on acceptait, par exemple, qu'une même personne exerce plusieurs fonctions, mais dans la limite d'un périmètre, ce qui est en phase aussi avec les règles de base en matière de gouvernance. Également, dans le secteur du transfert d'argent, nous avons créé des statuts qui permettent à des sociétés de faire cette activité sur ce segment-là. Et là, il n'y avait pas d'exigence de capital social autre que ce qui est prévu par le droit général des sociétés. Cependant, comme il y a un risque de non-dénouement des transferts, surtout des transferts sortants, nous avons mis en place une caution qui permet de couvrir ce risque. Donc, actuellement, des réflexions sont en cours pour poser un cadre général qui va fixer les principes généraux dans lesquels les fintechs peuvent exister et développer leur activité. Donc, ce cadre va être complété et conforté par la mise en place d'une sandbox réglementaire dont le processus d'ailleurs a été lancé au milieu du mois de septembre. Donc, toujours au niveau de l'encadrement global de l'activité des fintech comme étant, à partir du moment où elles sont connectées au système de paiement, elles vont être prises en charge par la nouvelle loi sur le système de paiement que la Banque centrale envisage de mettre en place, compte tenu aussi de l'avancée du switch national qui va imposer l'interopérabilité des acteurs de l'écosystème. Donc, l'engagement de la Banque centrale à soutenir les fintechs se traduit par un accompagnement pour stabiliser les projets, parce que souvent, lorsqu'on nous approche, ils n'ont pas une bonne idée des règles, même de base parfois, sur lesquelles ils doivent s'aligner. Ensuite, nous facilitons leur parcours. Il y a des échanges réguliers qui sont établis. Et aussi, nous impulsons la concertation pour faire émerger un cadre adapté à leur activité, puisque sans échange, on ne peut pas comprendre ce qu'ils souhaitent faire. Donc, on s'aperçoit que cela est nécessaire pour faire vraiment émerger un écosystème dynamique.
Thank you so much, Abraham. I just want to pick on one critical thing you mentioned in your description of the Guinea's regulatory environment when it comes to fintech. It's the issue of proportionality, proportionality of regulations, i.e., a one-size-fits-all approach to regulation, especially for startups, doesn't encourage the ecosystem to thrive. Olamide, I wanted to speak. I mean, Touch and Pay has existed for a few years. Do you think proportionality is needed when it comes to the way regulators should, be making regulations for the tech ecosystem?
Oh, yes, I completely feel that proportionality is needed. And Ingrid spoke to that when she was doing her introduction, when she said that there are different stages of a fintech. For each stages, there need to be like a regulatory framework for each of the stage. I mean, for example, in Nigeria, banks are now even getting into fintech. So you have a bank as big as Wema Bank having a product called Alert, and it's being sold as a fintech. GT Bank, the same thing. Almost all the big banks in Nigeria are into one fintech or the other. Access Bank has Hydrogen and BreezePay, for example. And if you look at that, you realize that it is really not fair when someone has all the licenses, is well regulated by CBN, and you want to use the same framework for a company that is just struggling to get 100 customers, but they are doing something innovative. To Ingrid's point, she mentioned is that if you really want to encourage innovation, you need to ensure that you meet people at the point of their need and encourage them to grow. And if you don't use the principle of proportionality to be able to say, maybe if you are processing less than $100 million, this should be your framework. If you are doing above that in a year, this should be your framework. Then I don't see people having the reason to come under regulations, because it's going to take a while. It might take an average of 4 or 5 years before a fintech can be as big as a bank, that the CBN or the NBR framework is actually developed to regulate. But I mean, by the time they start understanding the different stages of each company, it's just like venture capital have said, oh, this is a seed stage. This is a growth stage company. This is an angel stage company. And they're able to know the best type of capital to ingest into those companies based on the stage that they have. It's the same way the regulators must be able to identify the stage that a fintech is and be able to meet it with the proper and the best framework that can work for that stage. Patrick?
Apologies, I lost connections there. But I'm back in. Thank you so much, Olamide. Thank you so much.
Welcome back.
Yeah. Sorry, I lost connections there. So no doubt, the issue of proportionality continues to stand out as a key matter for discussions when it comes to regulations. A one-size-fits-all.
I can't hear Patrick. I don't know if I'm the only one.
Am I coming through?
I can hear
somebody
him.
Getting me? Okay, sorry, I lost connection. Am I coming through?
Yes, on my side.
We can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, I had a technical hitch there. Yeah, I was just recapping what Olamide was sharing, that proportionality is really central when it comes to regulations, regulation of fintech, because there are different stages. You have startups, you have scale-ups, you have those who are matured, products are matured in the market. So they go through different phases in terms of their development. And therefore, the regulations, that are coming out should recognize those different stages in the growth cycle of, startups generally, be them fintech or otherwise. So that's a good takeaway message, that proportionality is central to supporting the development of the ecosystem. We want to take the discussions further. We want to go back to Eva. You are the legal expert. Could you articulate some of the consequences that will come about because of poor governance? How can fintech apply accountability and transparency in their corporate governance? What are the consequences if governance is poor?
Number one, the fear of every founder, the collapse of an entity. So when you're struggling with your corporate governance or do not have proper checks and balances in place, the likelihood of that entity collapsing is very high, because you need strategy, you need direction, you need proper teams to execute what you need to do. If you do not have the proper team, the proper systems, what is required, certainly the collapsing is likely to happen. We've seen that across the globe. Most of the fintechs that are collapsing, not for lack of funding, not because of the product, but because of how everything is executed, which is the core of corporate governance. And then number two, investors. When you lose confidence with investors, you'll not get the funding that you need. You find that I think one of my co-panelists mentioned that there's a repeat of very many products in the market. The payment sector, for instance, where there's the payment sector, there are so many companies that are offering the product of payments. More or less, the product is the same. It all falls in the execution of it, and you find that investors back one product and back up one company and do not back another company, yet they're selling the same product. One of the reasons could be you have not well articulated how you're going to implement and execute this product for them to be able to gain profit and the business out of it. And if an investor is not confident in the team that is leading, that is using their money to bring business, they're certainly not going to invest in it. If an investor starts questioning your compliance tasks, who is leading your compliance? Do you even have a compliance person? Like Mr. Olamide mentioned, that investors require that you have a chief compliance officer. If you do not have that to ensure these corporate governance and other regulatory things are in place, they're not going to put money in you. The other thing is what, let me see what I have put in place. Of course, there is now more exposure to risks. If you do not comply to what the regulations say from each central bank, certainly you will not even be able to go beyond to get your licenses. Market risk, operational risks, compliance. So there's more exposure to risk if you do not have a proper corporate governance in place. So those are the key ones that I have. Of course, there is more than that, but those are the ones that will crumble and cripple and bring down an entity.
Thank you so much, Eva. For our technical support, I just have a message that says they are not getting. Is everybody hearing our voices? All participants, are you hearing us well? Somebody just said there is no voice. I'm not sure if it's me alone. Is everybody getting us? All participants, are you okay? Can you just type quickly in the chat whether you're okay, whether you're getting the audios coming out? Our tech support, can you just confirm that the audios are working?
They can have access to the audio.
Il fonctionne pour moi.
Okay, somebody's complained that they are not getting what we are saying.
Oh,
okay,
okay,
so few people have come to say it's okay. So we progress with the discussion. I want to come back to you, Olamide. Often, innovators, regardless of their stage of development, be them startups, scale-ups, full-blown, they see regulators as the bad guys. They are road blockers. They stop our show. They stop us from innovating. Is that a fair assessment of regulators by innovators?
Yeah, I mean, we had that notion before the Central Bank of Nigeria visited our office, and they realized that it wasn't true. And because the reason is because the same set of people that were regulating the banks, the people that we were trying to disrupt, let me put it that way, are the ones that are going to regulate us. And there was no clear communication to, distinguish them from or show that they understand our pain points more than they do the big boys. So basically, if the banks were doing their job, probably there won't be fintechs, really. Now, fintechs exist. Now, of course, now collaborating with the banks, and the same regulators are now regulating, the fintech. So it's kind of weird, and it's one of the reasons why a lot of people feel that they are the bad guys, they are the people to beat, they are the people to run away from. But eventually, when we started interacting with them, we found out that it wasn't true at all. As a matter of fact, you need them so much. You need to be very close to them, and you need to also help them in formulating and understanding the space that technology is now disrupting. For example, I feel that if more fintechs have collaborated with regulators, probably there would have been ban of crypto in Nigeria. But because we didn't have that collaboration well enough, and regulators just ban where they can't understand because there's a lot of fraud and a lot of issues happening in that space, and they see no good in it. Meanwhile, there are some elements of good in them. So collaboration, communication, constant webinars between the regulators and the innovator will actually, bridge that gap and make the collaboration more seamless.
Thank you so much. I mean, you've nailed it right on the head. I mean, this is what we promote at the African Fintech Network. One of the ways the fintech ecosystem and the wider digital finance ecosystem can develop faster in Africa is through collaboration. Three forms of collaboration. Collaboration amongst fintech, and how that is done is through your fintech associations. So we encourage fintechs, don't work alone. Be part of the fintech association in your country where there are other fintechs. I was in Nigeria last week for the Nigeria Fintech Week. It was huge. Hundreds of fintechs on display, showcasing their products. Not only showcasing, coming together to know each other, peer learn, hear from experts speak. So don't work in isolation. Be a member of your fintech association or whatever association, whatever it is called in your country. Be part of it. And number two, those associations must collaborate. They must work hand in gloves with policymakers, regulators, investors. So that's the only way you can support the ecosystem. You get to know the problems. Investors get to hear your problems. Regulators get to know what is happening in the space so they can respond appropriately. Development finance institutions get to know what is happening, what are the development needs, how can they support government? Is it infrastructure? Is it issues about 5G, 4G? How can they come in? So we promote collaboration at country level, and importantly, collaboration across countries. Because as I said in my intro, technology has no boundaries. So in Kenya, you want to operate in Nigeria, you want to operate in Mauritius, you want to operate in Egypt. The only way you can get it slightly easier is to collaborate. So we are the African Fintech Network. We promote that collaboration. We encourage associations and fintechs to reach out to each other. So if you want to reach a fintech, you're in Nigeria, you want to reach a fintech in Egypt, you go via your association. Your association will reach out to the association in Egypt. They can put you in contact with that fintech. It's so easy. It's seamless. So don't underestimate what Olamide has just said. With that said, I want to come back to you, Ingrid. I know you have delved into the issue of sandboxes, and both research and my own personal experience has shown that there has been a traction and an increase in number of sandboxes and innovation offices in Africa over the last 5 years. I think on top of my head, we have at least about 10 to 11 sandboxes now across Africa. But usually regulators don't know what it takes in terms of the resources, the commitment, technical resources, financial resources, and how do you fit the sandbox in your institution? So I wanted to speak into that. One, how do you position sandbox? Which department should it be? Should it be standalone? Should it be, it cuts across? And what are the considerations that are critical when it comes to establishing sandboxes? Technical considerations, financial considerations, because we want regulators on the call to really know the ramifications behind how sandboxes are operated and positioned in their institutions.
Well, thank you very much. I feel like that's a bit a complex one, because I have seen countries where sandboxes sit within the supervision departments and they are able to still function. However, I have seen that where sandboxes are most active and can bring impact is when they sit separately from the supervision departments, and they are able to not only assure the regulatory role, but also the support role, the conversation role, as Olamide was pointing out, about meeting different fintechs in their journeys. In terms of establishing the sandboxes, one thing I can tell fellow regulators is that putting in place the regulation is the easiest part. There's resources, everything is well defined, and you are able to study your market and know what to customize within a regulation. So putting in place the regulation is the easiest part of all. Now, when one has a regulation, or when one is thinking of having a regulation, they need to think about making it operational. To make a sandbox operational, what does it take? Usually, regulations are done to communicate to the market. An operational framework for the sandbox is done to communicate internally to say, how are we going to operationalize this thing? So once you've put in place a regulation, when you're thinking about a regulation, also think about an operationalization framework within the institution. In terms of resources, a sandbox is run by various resources. So you need someone who understands regulations, you need someone who understands technology, you need someone who understands cybersecurity and its issues. You need the supervision departments because they're used to the different requirements, capital requirements, governance requirements, and many more. So a sandbox is a framework that needs a various skill set. Is it always the case that within the sandbox office you need to have that skill set? Not necessarily. You can also leverage the skill set within the different departments, but have a framework where you bring them together under a task force or under a committee to study the different sandbox issues. In terms of human resources, that's it. In terms of financial resources, I feel like it keeps growing in line with the demand you have and in line with the different interventions. Remember, I said that a sandbox alone cannot be enough. The moment you start a sandbox, you realize you need to communicate with your market. You need to tell them what are the different regulations you have in place and how does the sandbox support you to be conversant with these regulations and to be able to get different facilitation around these regulations. So you need to reach out. You need to be able to receive fintechs to your office. And that brings in a financial implication. But these are things that go in line with demand. So the key thing is to have a regulation in place, a regulation that communicates the scope and everything that we know in regulations, but also to think about an internal framework of bringing together all the human resources that you need, all the expertise that you need under one sandbox task force. And then thirdly, which also brings a financial implication, is to be able to act as a market catalyst, not just to be focused on regulation, but also to think conversation, webinars, the outreach, receiving people for advisory, giving advisory hours to fintechs and things like that.
Thank you so much. I know we are pressed for time. We have about 15 minutes to go. So let me see how we can position it. I've lost my Q&A tab. Then I wanted to look, there was a question that was very interesting on environmental ESG implications for startups. Can you read that question out and allow our panelists to take a bit of break? And as I prepare to give you each 1 minute to recap and, you know, a takeaway message. Then there's a question on ESG implications to support fintech, but my Q&A tab is empty. I'm not seeing it any longer.
Hi, thank you. Actually, there's some questions before that came through. Yeah. So from the francophones, so let's not forget. And I'll just read it out in French. So ça c'est pour le Rwanda, Nigeria, et je vais aussi ajouter la Guinée à cette question. Donc, existe-t-il une réelle politique de protection des consommateurs des fintech au Rwanda, au Nigeria, en Guinée? Si oui, quelques grandes lignes, s'il vous plaît. Et si oui, serait-ce possible d'évoquer les forces et faiblesses de la vulgarisation de cette politique de protection des consommateurs, si préalablement effective au Rwanda, au Niger et en Guinée? So, those are the questions. Peut-être qu'on peut commencer avec la Guinée.
Yeah. So, yeah.
OK, merci. Pour la Guinée, il y a une réglementation de base pour la protection des consommateurs. Elle est plus articulée sur la transparence des coûts et les mécanismes de recours. Donc, pour les institutions établies ou toute autre institution, il y a une obligation de transparence en termes de certification, et donc des obligations d'affichage et en tout cas de communication partout moins et que cela soit prouvé. Ensuite, chaque entité, en tout cas qui exerce dans le secteur financier, doit mettre en place des organes en son sein qui permettent de recueillir les plaintes et de prouver que ces plaintes sont traitées dans des délais raisonnables et que les clients sont traités de manière équitable. Donc, ce qui exclut bien entendu les situations de conflit d'intérêts qui peuvent avoir entre une fintech et un prestataire dans le cas d'intermédiation. À cela s'ajoutent des dispositifs hors banque centrale, c'est que l'autorité de régulation des télécoms a aussi des dispositifs sur les segments services financiers numériques, notamment en ce qui concerne la continuité des services, leur disponibilité et les questions de confidentialité. Et aussi, il y a l'autorité qui traite des données personnelles, s'assure de l'intégrité de ces données et que tout cela se passe dans un environnement sécurisé et dans la limite, en tout cas, si les questions de confidentialité sont d'usage, que cela aussi s'applique.
Merci bien, Monsieur Diallo.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim. We want to give our panelists the opportunity for, I'll call it a pitch, a takeaway message. 1 minute each, starting with Eva. Eva, I want you to give a takeaway message on corporate governance in 1 minute.
Corporate governance is inevitable where fintech is concerned. It ensures, number one, that your internal streams, they know they're well taken care of. It ensures that your strategies are well executed and implemented in the products and your growth is secured. Thirdly, it ensures that your stakeholders have and retain the confidence with you being able to, to do action on what you said you're gonna do. And finally, ensures that you stay on good books, the regulators. The regulators' job is to ensure that one of the main things is to ensure that the consumers are protected. Corporate governance ensures that consumers are looked into and they are protected. If that happens, you have less issues with regulators. Those are my takeaways.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Olamide, the CEO of Church and Pay. What's your last message to the ecosystem?
Yeah, I'll say that when you are building a house, you need a very solid foundation, and you need to see your governance structure, your compliance as that foundation. Because if you build a house on a very bad foundation, no matter how tall it is, it's going to fall. And it's the way you have to see it. You have to take it extremely seriously before you talk about scaling, before you talk about raising real funds. Before you get to Series A, you need to ensure that your corporate structure, your governance, your compliance is in place so that when you scale, you don't have to look back. And if you can do that, I can assure you that the sky is the starting point. And it's also the difference between who wins and who doesn't.
Thank you so much. Who wins and who loses and who goes out of business tomorrow? Ibrahima, what's your takeaway message in terms of fintech regulation in Guinea and Africa generally?
Ok, merci Patrick. En guise de conclusion, c'est qu'il est, il ne faut pas perdre à l'esprit qu'il est nécessaire d'adopter une réglementation souple qui fixe des principes généraux. Ça, c'est vrai. Mais il faut aussi sans cesse concilier l'innovation avec la confiance. Sans confiance, il n'y a pas d'usage. Il faut avoir confiance en la technologie, confiance en la fintech et cultiver cette confiance-là vis-à-vis des apporteurs de fonds. Donc, ce qui implique de la transparence, de la responsabilité et de la pratique d'une bonne gouvernance. Parce que sans gouvernance appropriée dans le secteur des fintech, notamment des contrôles adéquats, une organisation globale d'entreprise et l'absence de gouvernance peut être fatale et rarement une fintech ne peut dépasser le stade d'amorçage sans une gouvernance établie. C'est vrai qu'elle doit être dimensionnée en fonction du stade de développement de la FinTech, de la phase d'idée jusqu'à sa maturité en passant par l'amorçage, l'accélération et son expansion. Aussi, il faut mettre des instances de dialogue permanent entre régulateurs et autres acteurs, que cela soit étendu à tous ceux qui interviennent dans la chaîne de valeur. Ça, c'est important. Pour des sujets clés, il faut mettre des groupes de travail sur ces thématiques. Aussi, ne pas négliger les ressources humaines qui sont aussi importantes que la gouvernance, puisque ça y va de la survie de l'entreprise FinTech. Des efforts d'éducation financière doivent être renforcés, puisque sans compréhension des produits, on ne peut pas, enfin, les consommateurs ne peuvent pas les adopter. Donc, il faudrait qu'une communication et une culture d'entreprise soient diffusées. L'État, de son côté, a un rôle important à jouer dans l'accompagnement par des mesures incitatives et diffuser sa politique de digitalisation. Aujourd'hui, dans nos pays, nous avons des stratégies de digitalisation au niveau État et il faudrait qu'il y ait un cadre de concertation pour aligner tout cela, pour éviter un désordre. Donc, je reviens encore une fois, on peut avoir des capitaux, mais sans de bonnes pratiques de gouvernance, il est indispensable, enfin, il est impossible que les fintechs se développent. Et il ne faut pas aussi perdre de vue que c'est la régulation qui crée la confiance. Il faut une réglementation, il faut des contrôles. Merci.
Thank you so much. You cannot put it better. You need regulations, you need controls, you need trust, you need capital. Last by no means the least, Ingrid, what's your takeaway message for participants on this webinar when it comes to fintech regulation and its sustainability general of the ecosystem in Africa?
Assuming that most participants we have on the webinar are fintechs, am I correct to think that, Patrick?
Yeah, there are fintechs, there are regulators, there are development finance institutions, yeah, different participants with different interests.
Amazing. So I'll just start generally on the issue of sustainability. We need to think sustainability at the end of the day. I've heard many cases where countries say that the biggest pool of a fintech ecosystem is startups. So what that means is that in terms of regulations, there needs to be proportionality, you've mentioned it, but there also needs to be a supporting ecosystem. But also to be able to envision sustainability, again, we have to view things from an ecosystem perspective. What is every player's role to ensure that this sector is sustainable? And finally, for the fintechs, to be able to achieve sustainability, even the idea itself matters. So let's think about a real problem statements in the market. Let's remember fintechs is not technology that is serving the financial sector. No, it's financial services that are being delivered on the vehicle of technology. So what this means is that there is still a need for financial services that one is tackling in a very innovative manner, but using technology to drive that. So when we keep that principle in mind, it helps us think, what is the need in the market and how can I solve it? That will bring sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I must thank each and every one of you for valuable insights. There is nothing more I can add other than to say that for fintechs, do your homework properly. Research about where you're operating. Go into the internet, the websites, dig out information on regulations, on governance issues. Do your homework properly. What are issues about consumer protection, data protection, AML, anti-money laundering, cyber security issues? Just read generally as a fintech. Get yourself abreast. 2, engage. Don't work in isolation. Engage with fintech, other fintechs. Engage through your fintech associations. It's so important. And for regulators, I think the advice is be innovative, be agile, be responsive, engage, collaborate with other regulators, collaborate and support the ecosystem. When we come together, it's a win-win situation. I will now pass it on. I know we are running out of time. So one of our partners on this webinar, African FinTech Forum. Alexis, for a closing remark.
Bonjour à tous. Merci Patrick de me passer la parole. Ce ne sera pas des mots de fin pour Africa FinTech Forum, mais beaucoup plus des mots d'introduction. Pour dire que c'est avec beaucoup de joie que nous avons participé à ce webinaire, parce que c'est l'une de nos problématiques majeures de pouvoir travailler avec les FinTech sur les problématiques de gouvernance, parce que pour nous, développer la FinTech, surtout en Afrique francophone, repose sur trois aspects. Le premier, c'est la protection des consommateurs. Le second, c'est la stabilité du système financier. Et le troisième, c'est que travailler sur les problématiques de gouvernance permettra le succès des FinTech. On l'a dit assez au Lamide, tous les autres speakers, la nécessité de pouvoir développer une interaction, développer un partenariat entre tous les acteurs de l'écosystème. La particularité en Afrique francophone, c'est que la plupart des banques centrales ont commencé à développer des bureaux FinTech et des sandbox, mais à date, aucun d'entre eux ne marche. Et à date, aucun d'entre eux n'est dans une démarche véritablement collaborative, participative, avec les acteurs de l'industrie, notamment les FinTech. Nous savons que c'est une industrie nouvelle qui a besoin pour chacun de nous de comprendre, de compréhension, qui a besoin pour chacun d'entre nous de pouvoir travailler étroitement les uns les autres. Nous pensons que pour pouvoir réussir surtout développer le cadre réglementaire, réussir le cadre réglementaire, faire du cadre réglementaire un élément de développement de l'industrie de la FinTech, il faut bien sûr cette collaboration. Et pour nous, la problématique de la gouvernance est très importante. Nous allons, par exemple, sur le forum que nous organisons à Abidjan les 16 et 17, avoir une conversation avec les réseaux d'agents. C'est une conversation, un atelier que nous organisons avec Bered and Cash Alliance des Nations Unies, avec aussi la Banque mondiale, notamment le SEGA, et aussi avec le partenariat d'acteurs comme Africa FinTech Network et puis Africa FinTech Network dont nous sommes nous-mêmes membres. Et puis aussi Making Financial Africa, parce que pour nous, il est important que les réseaux d'agents qui sont la terminaison du système, qui sont la terminaison d'un processus d'une offre de mobile money, qui sont au contact des populations, soient les plus informés, les plus engagés dans la finance digitale responsable. Donc, nous faisons venir sur le forum les associations de réseaux d'agents de plusieurs pays d'Afrique, Sénégal, Côte d'Ivoire, Togo, Mali, Niger, etc., pour justement réfléchir ensemble à cette implication-là des réseaux d'agents dans la protection des consommateurs, dans le développement de la finance digitale responsable. Parce que pour nous, c'est quelque chose de vraiment important. Et puis surtout, tout ce qu'il y a comme protection des consommateurs, cybersécurité, etc. Nous allons présenter sur le forum des programmes que nous avons, par exemple, pour ne pas faire de publicité, Deloitte Afrique francophone, afin que justement les FinTech puissent être outillés pour faire face à tous les risques de cybersécurité auxquels peuvent être confrontés dans leurs opérations. Donc pour nous, il est vraiment important de pouvoir travailler de concert avec tous les acteurs. On ne le fait jamais seul, on le fait toujours avec des partenaires. C'est pourquoi nous avons tout au long de cet événement que nous allons organiser les 16 et 17 novembre, la présence d'acteurs internationaux, d'acteurs de renom. Par exemple, la Commission des Nations Unies pour l'Afrique, qui va aussi nous aider à justement organiser cet événement, mais surtout pouvoir impliquer à un niveau beaucoup plus beaucoup plus institutionnel les acteurs engagés dans le processus de développement de la finance digitale en Afrique. Donc, éventuellement, pour nous, il est important de pouvoir avoir ce type de rencontre où les acteurs peuvent se parler. C'est l'essence même du Next FinTech Forum, où les acteurs peuvent interagir ensemble et surtout, ils peuvent ensemble identifier les problématiques sur lesquelles il faut agir pour pouvoir développer l'industrie, que ce soit sur les problématiques de gouvernance, que ce soit sur les problématiques de sécurité, que ce soit sur les problématiques de protection des consommateurs. Pour nous, ce n'est qu'ensemble que nous pouvons trouver la solution, que nous pouvons trouver des réponses. Et je pense que c'est cette même pensée, c'est cette même réflexion qu'ont eu chacun des acteurs, qu'ont eu chacun des panélistes. il n'y a que pour réussir, pour réussir, il n'y a qu'à développer des projets ensemble, il n'y a qu'à agir de façon commune et il n'y a qu'à agir dans une stratégie qui soit concertée et dans laquelle tous les acteurs trouvent leur intérêt. Donc, c'est notre mot d'introduction, c'est aussi notre mot de fin. Et on voudrait vraiment pouvoir inviter surtout tous les acteurs qui sont là au Next Fintech Forum les 16 et 17 novembre à Abidjan.
Thank you so much, Alexei. We'll definitely be in Abidjan to support you. I want to give Africa and Nenda one last minute to say the final remarks before I wrap up.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I think everything has been said. There's not a lot to add to the call to action from our panelists, note from Alex, and it was a pleasure. One thought that always comes back is collaboration, and we can insist even in the organization of this webinar. We were intentional in the type of panelists that we wanted, someone from the fintech, from the regulation, from research, and gender balance. So collaboration with public-private, between regulators, between fintechs is something that we definitely want to enhance on. I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning. My name is Janaba Khan from Africa Nenda, and I am the advocacy and partnership lead. And it was a pleasure working with Patrick from Africa Fintech Network, which we have a very good relationship with, Making Finance Work for Africa, which this is our second time engaging with them through these webinar series. And so just as a closing out, Fintech is evolving, Fintech is developing, and we need to put in place the necessary enabling, infrastructure, regulation, consumer protection in order to push innovation, but at the same time protect our consumers. So thank you all for participating in this session, and I won't take more time because I know we're a little bit late in time, and I'll pass it on to Patrick for any other comments. Please visit www.africanenda.org. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank participants who have spared 90 minutes of their time. I know you're all busy, you're regulators, you're fintechs, you're development finance institutions, you're a private person, and you're in the tech space, maybe a student, you're in academia, you're in research. Hope you've gained some insights. The issue about regulation and governance is an ongoing discussion. It's an ongoing discussion because it's an evolving landscape. So we encourage, read about it. If you want more information, you can contact me, Patrick Conte, on my LinkedIn or www.africanfintechnetwork.com. I'm sure panelists are also open. Reach out directly on our LinkedIn. I know we have not responded to all questions. You can write directly to me on LinkedIn. I can respond because this is my passion. This is what we do at the African Fintech Network. We advocate to support the development of the fintech ecosystem, be it regulations, be it governance, be it funding, be it policy. We advocate for the development of the ecosystem. So we are prepared to respond to the questions. Thank you, panelists, for your time, your insights, your experiences. Thank you all, and we look forward to, hopefully, a third series of this webinar. Thank you, and bye.